Hello everyone, I'm Noctowls, and welcome to one last match analysis for the Newport Noctowls in Season 12 of the Whooper Club League. Last time we played in the Paldean Finals against Steve's Waterdeep Wobbuffets, in which we outlasted his Sun Hyper offense to grab a 5-0 win, once again off the back of Hydreigon. This time we're in the finals against the winner of the Johto Conference, Michael and his Route 1 Birbs. And Michael's path this season is a bit different from mine. While I went undefeated over in the Paldean Conference, he struggled at first in Johto, before going on a tear with a set of dominant performances, including big wins against the Steamrollers, Incineroar, and Bouffalon, three teams that have kind of had my number more than most others can say. And of course, the Birbs have also had my number as of late. We've played quite a few games. Starting in Season 8, I took a win with the help of Iron Defense Body Press Heatran, abusing his Umbreon, and I had Scarf Rapidash Galar taking out his Dragapult. That was one of my favorite games from that season, actually. And then in Season 9, I can't go without mentioning the heartbreaking Week 1 in which Tony and I set up a Sun-boosted Charizard, only to double miss our Heat Wave on turn 1 against Michael and John, turning our strong position into kind of a hopeless one. But then, fast forward to the playoffs of that season, where I paired up with Nate to knock Michael and Steve out of the playoffs, countering their boosting Tapu Fini strategy with a combination of Sleep Powder from my Tangrowth and the combined power of our Metagross and Volcarona. Then in Season 10, things did turn around when Michael ended my undefeated streak in the final week of that regular season, in which I did forget to bring Electric Surge on my Pincursion, but that was far from the only reason I lost that match. Big props to his Alone in the Sandslash that forced so much pressure onto my team. He then went on to win that season for his first championship title. And then in Season 11, Michael knocked me out in the first round of playoffs in a climactic 1-0 match where I got so close to the win, but could not break through his Volcanion. And then Michael went on to win that season as well, giving him his second championship in a row. And now, here in Season 12, we meet again for the first time in the finals. A win for Michael would give him his third championship in a row and his third victory against me in a row. And a win for me means, well, stopping that and claiming the title for myself, as well as a perfect season. The stakes are high, well, as high as they could be in a Pokemon Draft League among friends, but still, we're both pulling out all the stops for that win. So without further ado, let's get into the matchup. Michael drafted a team consisting of Chien-Pao that cannot Terra, Hawlucha, Iron Moth, Salamence, Lucario, Gardevoir, Florges, Magnezone, Electros, Ting-Lu, and Slowbro. And let's not beat around the bush. Michael's top 5 of Slowbro, Ting-Lu, Chien-Pao, Salamence, and Iron Moth are all coming to this match. He has not left them behind yet. They're easily his top 5 Mons, and they look really good in the matchup. So I think it only makes sense to cover those top 5 individually and alongside each other, since the dynamic of that core does change how each matchup works just a little bit. This will also be a little interesting to look at, because my opponent obviously drafted from the other conference. I've been up against most of these Pokemon already within my own conference, so I can kind of compare how the matchup went last time with how I think it applies to this matchup. So I'm going to start with Slowbro, the physically defensive wall that can answer a good chunk of my team. Michael can switch it in on Azumarill, Great Tusk, and Dondozo fairly safely, and from there he can do any number of things. Pivot back out for that nice regenerator recovery, or go on the offensive. Slowbro's Water and Psychic Stabs actually go a long way in this matchup, alongside either Ice Beam or Body Press to cover Hydreigon. Because of that, I actually don't have that many options of hitting Slowbro hard, and that also showed in my Week 8 match, where I used Thunderbolt Farigiraf to handle it. But it's a lot harder to hit it when it's paired up with the defensive behemoth that is Ting-Lu. Most of my offensive answers to Slowbro are walled by Ting-Lu, and vice versa. Great Tusk looks amazing against Ting-Lu, and Azumarill threatens it out as well, but both of them are stopped fairly easily by Slowbro. And Hydreigon threatens Slowbro pretty hard, but in turn gets hard-walled by Ting-Lu and its massive special defense. This started to turn into a big problem with team building. The defensive core does share a few weaknesses, specifically Grass and Bug, so I do have some offense that potentially strikes both for good damage. Rotom-Mow and Fortress. We'll revisit that later. As for Ting-Lu itself, this is Michael's best hazard setter if he wants to go with a specially defensive leftover set, but he has also been known to invest a lot of attack and slap on a Choice Band or Assault Vest to make for a threatening tank. I definitely have the tools to play around it, but this is a roadblock for several of my strategies revolving around especially offensive win conditions. So that's the main defensive backbone, and the other 3 of this top 5 make up the essential offense, basically, starting with Chien-Pao, another ruinous legendary. And I have gone over it before, but my Chien-Pao matchup is actually fairly good. Azumarill, Dondozo, and Fortress make pretty good answers for it, and in my Week 1 match we saw a physically defensive Fortress completely stonewall a Chien-Pao all on its own. So Michael is probably feeling a lot of pressure in the team builder if he wants to make a lot of progress with this, but I'm sure he does still bring it. Its combination of speed, power, and priority on both stabs, but especially Ice Shard, means that Chien-Pao keeps a lot of my offensive threats in check, and it can sweep if given the right opportunity against a weakened defensive core. Like Steve's Roaring Moon in the previous week, this becomes very threatening if my defensive answers are worn down, and he could build a strategy around that. Another threatening setup sweeper is Salamence, which has less raw power and speed than Chien-Pao, but is very threatening in its diversity. A standard Dragonance Salamence is very threatening in a vacuum, and that set could actually put in a lot of work against me in week 8, but I don't think that's what Michael goes with for this matchup. Unaware Dondozo walls that no problem, so I'm expecting more of a mixed attacking or pure special attacking set to be a better wall breaker that paves the way for his faster sweepers. So it has very few counters on my team, especially since its speed tier is so good for the matchup, outrunning all but 2 of my Pokemon naturally while still having plenty of wall breaking potential. I didn't really touch on the speed tiers in the initial analysis, but they're generally not in my favor, and this is a big reason why. His best breaker, in my opinion, still outspeeds a lot of my offense, which is pretty scary. And rounding out the top 5, we have Iron Moth. Yep, here's where the Iron Moth from the Johto conference ended up, and we get the rare Draft League mirror matchup. And I think our Moths are going to be a very big factor in who gets the advantage. Mine is very threatening towards his team, and his is threatening to mine. It's faster or as fast as every one of my relevant threats, and I've talked at length about how much my team struggles with special attackers this season. I can at least pick out what I think he's going to run though. My own Moth being here kind of forces him to run Psychic to win the mirror, and Fire Stab feels necessary as well. The last 2 move slots are a bit harder to predict, but I'm guessing Dazzling Gleam to beat Hydreigon, and Energy Ball to beat the water types, probably with Terra Grass to make itself even better against those waters, as well as Great Tusk and Tyranitar. So an all-out attacking set makes the most sense, or else it's missing coverage against something important. That could mean a Choice Scarf to make sure it outspeeds everything in the matchup, but I'm thinking Boots or a boosting item would be more likely given its already great speed here to make this a solid win condition even without any setup. So those are the essentially guaranteed brings. The 6th slot here is definitely a toss-up, but I think I would go with Hawlucha for one very important reason. It is his only hazard remover, so I feel like a defog set is very important unless my opponent wants to run a lot of boots on his very hazard weak team, or sees game plan fall apart to steady Rock's chip. Without this, I think my team wins the hazard game in a very dominant fashion, or at the very least we get to benefit from more useful items as Michael is forced to bring boots on so many of his Pokemon. As for the actual Hawlucha set, I can see good utility coming from a defensive pivot set, which can actually switch into and threaten Great Tusk, as well as some Hydreigon sets. That, or he could go with a Mold Breaker Swords Dance set to lure in and quickly break down my Dondozo for his other sweepers to take advantage of. Or this could be his late game sweeper with Unburdened Swords Dance to take advantage of a weakened defensive core. That probably isn't too likely. I think he'll be too wary of Dondozo, and I think this is coming by merit of defog and utility against Great Tusk, so we'll go assuming that it's having that kind of set. That slot is definitely up in the air though. I think some other Pokemon make sense there. Magnezone makes sense. It's another special attacker to take pressure off of Iron Moth, and it actually has pretty decent matchups across the board. It works pretty well against the water types with strong electric moves, especially it switches well on Azumarill's Play Rough, and it also traps Fortress with Magnet Pull if it wants to. It struggles more than most of his team against my top 3 picks, but Michael has a decent matchup there already, and this is a decent Terra option as well to flip those matchups. Lucario is a really aggressive option in the last slot to give my opponent some more breaking power. It would have a hard time switching into me, but I would also have a hard time switching into it. My default switch-ins to a Swords Dance Extreme Speed set would all be blown back by a Life Orb Focus Blast. That said, this is definitely outclassed a bit by Salamence as both a sweeper and mix attacker, but I think there's merit to running both, with one breaking for the other. Moving along, we're getting less likely as we go. We have Florges. I'm not actually too sure what Michael would want to do with this. Intuitively, a Spadef set makes sense, and the most impactful effect of that is that it's really pressuring me to run poison coverage on Iron Moth, just in case it comes. It does a pretty good job of checking non-Sludge Wave variants of Iron Moth, as well as Hydreigon, but I'm not sure Michael will need it alongside Ting-Lu. And then we move to Gardevoir, a much more offensive take on the Fairy type slot. If this shows up, I can't see it holding anything other than a Choice Scarf, and with that, it does a pretty decent job of keeping my top threats in check with strong Psychic and Fairy moves. With Mystical Fire for coverage as well, this is another special attacker that I could have a lot of trouble switching in on. But Choice Scarf Gardevoir is fairly inflexible, and non-Scarf variants simply lose to my faster threats, so I think it would be risky to bring this to a finals matchup. And lastly, we have Electros as an alternative to Magnezone. I think this serves about the same function of hitting my water type super effectively, but it trades Magnezone's steel typing for Levitate and better coverage, which among other things makes it a little better against Great Tusk. I think Michael would want to prioritize Magnezone's resistance to Play Rough, but I suppose this is a decent alternative. But looking through the full team, I'm okay with my matchup here, but my team building was pretty restricted. The most common through line was the combination of that top 5. Particularly that offensive trio paired up with Ting-Lu just invalidated a few of my potential brings. For example, Poltegeist. The damage we do to Ting-Lu even after a Shell Smash and Terastallization is frankly a little embarrassing. A +2 modest super effective Terra Blast does 84% at most to a standard Ting-Lu set, and about 65% to Assault Vest variants. That is a 2-hit KO, but we need to be 1-hit KOing after Shell Smash setup. Keep in mind that's also using up my Terra option, and this team is not giving me a free setup or sweep anyway, with power and priority all around. I think there's maybe a world where I could have won with a Shell Smash sweep, but it's not reliable enough for me. Also, because of the Ting-Lu matchup, I benched Kill Watchwolf pretty early. There are some things it could kind of keep in check with its high speed, but Ting-Lu switches in and on all day, so I'd basically be limited to clicking U-turn every time Kill Watchwolf is in. No thanks. Tyranitar has a few more options to deal with Ting-Lu, specifically some coverage that would deter it from switching in, like Low Kick, but it doesn't match up that well against the rest of the team. I guess it checks Iron Moth and could maybe threaten Slowbro, but even those are shaky, with both guaranteed to be carrying super effective coverage for me. Rotom-Mow was a lot more tempting. Like I mentioned before, it's my grass type, so it could mow through both Ting-Lu and Slowbro with Leaf Storm. However, it is super scared of Chien-Pao, Salamence, and Iron Moth, not to mention Magnezone and Florges, which also wall it. The matchup looked good against the defensive core until I looked at the rest of the team. Finally, cutting off right outside my 6 springs is Dondozo. And that feels a little insane. This was a really hard decision to make, but hear me out. Unaware Dondozo is a hard wall to Chien-Pao and Dragon Dance Salamence, and it also deals with Ting-Lu very effectively. But Michael absolutely knows this, and I think it'll force him to prep differently in the team builder. I don't think there's any way he just brings Dragon Dance Salamence, and I think Chien-Pao would also have other contingencies and not just run Swords Dance or something like that. I don't want to leave behind such a good failsafe if he does end up bringing that kind of setup. It's a big risk, but I'm going to make the hard call. I think that we're both looking to trade down resources until one of us runs out, and if I think he's playing into that game plan, then Dondozo simply doesn't have much of a role to play. It's unfortunate, but if I'm correct, then Dondozo already did its job of preventing setup in the team builder without showing up to the battle. That leaves us with a team of 6 that should be consistently applying pressure or making progress. That's my game plan, and the easiest way I've found to play into that was with Azumarill. We've seen this before with Logic versus Fruit Taco, but Play Rough really is such a spammable move into this team. The only resists would be Iron Moth and Magnezone, neither of which appreciates water coverage. Oh yeah, and Slowbro switches in, right? Well, maybe not as well as you'd think. With a Choice Band, Azumarill Play Rough actually has a pretty decent chance of 2-hit KOing physically defensive leftover Slowbro after rocks. This is probably the scariest Pokemon for my opponent to be looking at from high health, simply because nothing on his team really switches in safely. Every time Azu is safely in against something like Salamence or Chien-Pao or Ting-Lu, he has to pick the right switch in or take heavy damage. And Azumarill gets plenty of switching opportunities in this matchup, between Chien-Pao, Dragon moves from Salamence, and Ting-Lu potentially setting hazards that we can just get in on for free. Waterfall is going to be the water style of choice. It's a bit weaker than Liquidation, but I didn't miss out on any damage thresholds. And I figured that there's maybe a chance we can cheese some slower Pokemon with flinches if absolutely necessary. Aqua Jet is also mandatory priority, and it makes Azu a nice backup check to Iron Moth. And the last move slot was open since there is no need for coverage beyond what we already have, so I went with Copycat. The main idea here is that Azumarill can switch in on Ting-Lu setting up rocks or spikes, and if I'm not confident that I can read the switch in on the next turn, I can still take advantage of the switch by copying the hazard setup before swapping out. While we're at it, maybe Azumarill switches in on a Ting-Lu Throat Chop, and then Copycat allows us to get a clean 2-hit KO on Slowbro. That's pretty optimistic. It's really just filler and a niche tech option in the right situation. As for EVs, Max Attack Adamant is obvious, and we're running enough speed to outrun a paralyzed Salamence, which I'll talk about later. The speed investment is nice to do that, but I'm also doing this to avoid speed creeping shenanigans with Ting-Lu or Magnezone and Electros. Hopefully Azu can just outspeed them all comfortably if I need to play those matchups. The rest goes into HP for a pretty nice bulk against Michael's top threats, and lastly we are Terra Fairy, which makes Play Rough even deadlier and sheds weaknesses to Electric and Grass. I have really high hopes for this set. It's a good showcase of bulky offense, maybe just as good as this Fortress set, which is also Max Attack Adamant. And this looks like a weird set, but weirdly enough, this solves a lot of potential problems in a very concise way. Like I said before, I don't have much that threatens both Slowbro and Ting-Lu, and Rotom was looking too vulnerable to my opponent's offensive threats to use in the matchup. Enter Loaded Dice Pin Missile Fortress, which has the speed investment to outspeed both speed creeping 8-speed Ting-Lu, and then we 2-hit KO both at worst. And looking a level deeper, Fortress combination of coverage, bulk, and sturdy means that it beats almost every one of my opponent's Pokemon one-on-one. See, I was having trouble with the lead matchup in this battle. Michael has almost always, if not always, brought Iron Moth, Salamence, or Chien-Pao as his lead. And I didn't have that much that could handle all three of them in one team slot, apart from my own Iron Moth, which I'm saving as a late game piece, or this, actually. In fact, it beats just about any lead. Sturdy means that we're never one-hit KO'd by anything, and in return we can one-hit KO all of Chien-Pao, Iron Moth, Lucario, non-sturdy Magnezone, and Gardevoir with a high roll on Pin Missile. Intimidate Salamence is not one-hit KO'd, but it takes heavy damage from Ice Spinner, and Hawlucha is also not one-hit KO by Ice Spinner, but it shouldn't be able to 2-hit KO us in return. So the only matchups Fortress would solidly lose from full health would be Electros, Florges, and sturdy Magnezone. I'm counting on this to come out as my lead and take something out, setting the tempo early and giving me a leg up on the trade war. I'll be happy with whatever hole this opens up. Hopefully the rest of my team will be able to take advantage of it. The only other note is that I dedicated the last moveset to Spikes, which is mostly just there to give myself a safe button to click on a switch out, but Fortress can probably stack hazards in front of a defensive Florges set as well, so that is another option if it comes up. So that's two, oddly enough, bulky breakers to start the build, and they're hopefully paving the way for my two main win conditions. The first being Iron Moth, back with Booster Energy Speed. This is nice to outspeed my opponent's entire team, but I was also drawn to this set because it encouraged me to go max speed Timid, which lets me probably outspeed his Iron Moth even if the booster is used up already, since I don't think Michael's going to go max speed Timid on his Iron Moth. I had to invest less special attack to get speed boost, but even with that in mind, it hits really hard, and the added HP and EVs allow us to take a few hits we couldn't have otherwise. Like, we can't afford to take a little more chip and still be out of range of Chien-Pao's Sucker Punch. The moveset itself was kind of obvious. Fiery Dance is the stab coverage for Chien-Pao and Magnezone, and it helps us boost even further for a full sweep. Sludge Wave hits Florges and Gardevoir, which would otherwise block a sweep from full health. Dazzling Gleam hits Ting-Lu and Salamence, and Psychic is for the other Iron Moth, since that's actually the only move that Iron Moth gets that would do any significant damage to its mirror matchup. We're also Terra Fairy, which I expect to be using to get better damage into Ting-Lu. Even with Terra though, I need to chip down Ting-Lu heavily if I want Iron Moth to actually break through it, so that's the main early game goal, to set up an Iron Moth sweep. And even if it doesn't end up as my main sweeping threat, this is a great check to have in the back as an emergency answer to Chien-Pao, since we outspeed after the booster energy and we can maybe even set up on it with Fiery Dance. My other win condition is going to be Great Tusk, which is going for a Rapid Spin setup, this time with Expert Belt. Max Attack Adamant means that we'll be hitting like a truck, and I had to go near max speed along with it to outrun Jolly Chien-Pao after one spin. There are a few setup opportunities. I think the best shot is to threaten out Ting-Lu and spin on the switch. From there, Great Tusk could power through a weakened team with Expert Belt boosted coverage. Headlong Rush is our stab move of choice, and it hits pretty hard against neutral targets like Chien-Pao, Florges, and Gardevoir, while also obliterating Iron Moth, Lucario, and Magnezone. Ice Spinner is coverage for Salamence and Hawlucha, which would wall us otherwise, and Knockoff is our coverage of choice for Slowbro, potentially powered up with Terra Dark to get a clean 2-hit KO on it. If I don't want to Terra, an Expert Belt Knockoff does still do a lot, but Slowbro would definitely need some chip before I can safely take it down. I do miss the Fighting Stab, since without it I can't guaranteed one-shot the Chien-Pao, and I don't two-shot the Ting-Lu, but I'm kind of hoping that they stay away from this matchup out of fear of the potential fighting move. That, or I could chip those two down. I especially like the idea of using Iron Moth and Great Tusk together to beat Ting-Lu, with one chipping it down for the other to sweep. So we had 2 breakers and 2 sweepers so far, and now I'll be moving on to my supporting cast, starting with Hydreigon, running max HP and leftovers, and this thing's job is to switch in on Slowbro. We do a great job of shrugging off Surfs and Psychics, and from there I gave myself the moveset to have as many options as possible to play around what my opponent wants to do. Dark Pulse, along with a minimal special attack investment, punishes Slowbro for staying in by 2-hit KOing it even through a Colbur Berry. The move also offers good neutral coverage, so big threats like Salamence and Iron Moth can't just switch in for free. Focus Blast is my other attacking move of choice. I do hate running this move, but its power does make up for the lack of special attack investment, and it's my best option to punish any Dark Pulse switch-ins, primarily Ting-Lu. Granted, it's not doing that much damage to Ting-Lu, it's like 31% max to the standard set, but chip damage is chip damage, and we need to rack up that for my sweepers to actually break through it. Stealth Rock is a guaranteed way to make progress on the switch, especially with my opponent's limited removal options, and U-turn allows me to pivot out. I think the ideal sequence would be to switch in on Slowbro, take minimal damage, Focus Blast the Ting-Lu switch in, and then use U-turn to get an extra tick of damage while pivoting out to a better matchup. We are Terra Ghost because Hydreigon does also serve the purpose of checking Swords Dance Lucario with his speed investment, so Terastallizing means that we become immune to extreme speed and KO in return with Focus Blast, even if it's Terra Normal. Ghost is also a decent defensive type for the matchup anyway, since it trades all of Hydreigon's base weaknesses for weaknesses to Ghost and Dark moves, which I don't expect my opponent to have a lot of. And last, but not least, we have Farigiraf, making a finals appearance. I love it. This is a specially defensive wish set, whose main purpose is to sponge special attacks for the team and pass big wishes to my other teammates. Azumarill and Fortress in particular really thrive on using their bulk from full HP to trade down, so if I can get them back to full with a successful wish pass, they can force even more progress. Farigiraf itself is a good switch in on special Salamence, Iron Moth, and Gardevoir, which would all be pretty big problems otherwise. And the Terra is Rock, which I blatantly copied from Illogic's Wo-Chien set that he brought against Michael in the previous week. Terra Rock with Sap Zipper means that Farigiraf should be a hard stop to Iron Moth, since we would resist both of its stab moves and keep an immunity to Energy Ball. The moveset is unfortunately pretty passive, but hopefully that isn't a huge problem with the expectation of no setup moves for my opponent. Future Sight is at least good damage, albeit delayed damage, and it sets up well to switch into a Wall Breaker. Imagine switching to Azu and then forcing something to take a banded player off and a Future Sight on the same turn. That would be ideal. And Thunderwave was better than any coverage I could think of, since it's just an immediate disruption option that cripples most switch-ins not named Ting-Lu. This set is completely walled by Ting-Lu, but the other 5 Pokemon I brought either beat it or threaten it out, so I think I'm okay with that. All I really need Farigiraf to do is pass wishes or Future Sights to other teammates. That's the full team. I'm expecting a very fast-paced match from my opponent, and for the most part I'm planning to match that, outside of support Farigiraf, which should hopefully stop more of his momentum than mine. With all that said, it's time to enter the finals. Magnezone is Pokemon number 6 for the Birbs. That's not too surprising, it probably makes Azumarill a little worse, but Farigiraf and Hydreigon make pretty decent switch-ins for it. And no Hawlucha means no hazard removal, which I am so happy to see. I will absolutely be taking advantage of that. I already have my lead locked in as Fortress, so let's get started. Good luck, have fun, Michael. It's Iron Moth. Well, one issue with Fortress that I haven't gone over yet is that I really can't afford to make hard reads with it. If there's a switch coming, I could theoretically spike up, but if this is a fire move incoming, then I've wasted the whole point of this set on a single layer of spikes. Nope, I can't read a switch. I just have to Earthquake here. The question is, will he take the bait? No, he won't, as Salamence comes in for free on that Earthquake. That's too bad. It would have been nice to start the game 6-5, or I guess 5-5 with a 1 HP Fortress. With Salamence in front of me, Ice Spinner is an option, but it doesn't kill after Intimidate, so I think I will tuck Fortress in the back for later. Like I said, I think this should be a special Salamence, so I'm going to switch to Farigiraf to take a potential Flamethrower. But instead, it's Substitute and Leftovers. This wouldn't be Sub-Dragon Dance, would it? If it is, that might be game right there. That would be the worst case, but no way it's Dragon Dance, right? Right? I'll Future Sight here to eventually break the sub, but please don't set up on me? Okay, that's just a hurricane, and the damage does tell me that this is a max attack sound, max special attack sound, excuse me. I was right, thank goodness. Anyway, I do just need to wait out the future sight to break the sub, so while I'm at it, I might as well heal back up. Another hurricane hits as I wish up, and on the next turn I'm just going to protect to avoid any shenanigans, as he does reveal Draco to try and grab a little more damage for that potential KO. Well, we are kind of back after this wish, pretty much back to full HP. It's a neutral position, and he's just going to set up another sub as I wish. I feel like that should have been maybe another future sight into a wish on the next turn, and evidently past me also agreed with that, because as he hits me with another hurricane, I just wish again, and that obviously fails. That was straight up a misinput. I was going back and forth between calcs and the battle and didn't pay enough attention. My bad, but it's actually not that big a deal. I'll just start the sequence over again. Go for a wish as he hits his 4th hurricane in a row. But on the next turn, I'm going to set up my future sight. A hurricane will actually finally miss as I set it up. And my wish does bring me back to full. So now that I'm at max HP with a fresh future sight up, I can wish one more time. Now we actually do dodge that last hurricane, which is very convenient. And now wish and future sight are both set off to go on the next turn. I might as well get a breaker in, and I think Azumarill is the best play. So we can actually switch pretty well on the hurricane. No confusion, thank goodness. And future sight hits. Wish comes back, and I am in with a full health Azumarill, and the sub is gone. This is my chance to fire off a big attack. I'm very happy with that play. But here's where I am kind of going to make a bit of a misplay. As the Slowbro switches in, I decided to click Waterfall instead of Play Rough. My logic here was that Play Rough was fairly obvious, so there was a decent shot that Magnezone would be the switch in to take it, but I think the surface level Slowbro play was pretty obvious. I should have just tried to 2-hit KO with Play Rough. Magnezone doesn't even really appreciate a banded Play Rough anyway, since it doesn't have reliable recovery, but at the very least I get to find out that the Slowbro's helmet, but Michael probably also just found out that I'm banded, so moot point. We're going to have to move on. Hydreigon is definitely my dedicated answer to Slowbro. Yeah, we take a Surf pretty well. And this is basically a guaranteed switch out from my opponent. So with no removal to speak of, why don't I just lay down some permanent rocks? Ting-Lu makes plenty of sense as a switch in, as my rocks do go up for free. From here, I think I'm safe to go into Azumarill, since I'm expecting Ting-Lu to either click Body Press or set up a Hazard. So I'm going to U-turn out. That's actually some nice chip. And Azumarill comes in on the critical hit Earthquake. That's real bad. Obviously the crit was unfortunate, but a quick calc reveals that this Ting-Lu has significant attack investment. That and the lack of leftovers makes me think that this is probably an offensive Assault Vest Ting-Lu, and Michael just made a great read with that Earthquake to catch Azu. I'm at incredibly low health now, which means Chien-Pao just got a whole lot more threatening to my team, and I also happen to be in Slowbro's Rocky Helmet range. That does actually mean that the next play is decently obvious. Slowbro is probably coming in to take a banded hit, but this time it would just KO outright with the Rocky Helmet to take out the last of Azu's health. I could double back into Hydreigon on this, but I think I can make a different switch into Forretress as Slowbro does come in. Now, up until this point, I have been able to pretend that this is a defensive piece for me. Forretress hasn't attacked anything yet, and even the switch I did just now feels pretty defensive to tank a potential Ting-Lu attack. So this Slowbro probably feels pretty safe right now. I think it's time, though, to reveal the set. Pin Missile comes out and hits 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Got a little bit lucky there with the crit, and then I take a little under half from the Surf. The plan came together. It's not quite a KO, and it's unfortunate the Slowbro is the mod that I caught, since it can regenerate that health back, but we can definitely take advantage of this huge hole for now. Great Tusk looks really good if I can find a setup opportunity in the near future, and Azumarill can claim big damage if it ever gets in safely again. As for the follow-up play right now, I can actually take advantage of the fact that I know he's going to want to save Slowbro with that regenerator recovery, so I can pretty easily just set up a layer of spikes. As the Salamence actually comes in and get that spike up. The extra hazard actually pressures Slowbro quite a bit, since rocks and layer spikes actually, it cuts into regenerator recovery a lot. But since Salamence is in here, I can really only have one answer to it again with the Farigiraf. I can come in on a Mist Hurricane, and as Slowbro comes back in on the next turn, I can just set up a Future Sight. It's taking that nice hazard damage, which is cool. This actually isn't the best situation. I really wish I had an immediate offensive move to take out the last quarter of this Slowbro's HP, but as it stands, all I can really do is switch to Hydreigon, I guess, as Slowbro is going to obviously get back to very healthy numbers with a Slack Off. That is unfortunate, but I mean, it's a lot of progress that we bought with Fortress that just got undone, but at the very least, I can say Fortress got me a free turn or two. Okay, well, we're back in on Slowbro with Hydreigon anyway, and I do have a choice to make. Dark Pulse obviously hits the Slowbro pretty hard, and Focus Blast would catch a switch. There's also the Future Sight to consider, that's up right now, and with that in mind, I feel like my opponent is more likely to switch to the safer Ting-Lu to tank a hit and be immune to the delayed Psychic move. So I'm going to click Focus Blast. At the very least, if Slowbro stays in to take it, it still takes a pretty decent chunk from Focus Blast and Future Sight, even if they're both resisted. So I see this as more of a hedge. I would be okay with it if he stays in or switches to Ting-Lu. Or he could switch to Chien-Pao, and Focus Blast means that it's dead. Thank goodness it hit, I guess. Yeah, I guess if you're expecting a Dark Pulse and Future Sight combo, that's a good aggressive switch. It would have pressured me a lot. But instead, Hydreigon got to show its great coverage for the matchup. That is an amazing turn in my favor. If Chien-Pao had gotten in safely, I don't know what I was going to do. Azumarill and Fortress are both kind of unhealthy at this point, so I think it would have claimed a KO there. It's definitely a huge relief to see that thing gone. We're at a 6-5 game, as his Iron Moth is going to come in for the revenge. And it does reveal its boots, which is good to know. But for now, the Dazzling Gleam is pretty obvious. I'm going to switch out to Farigiraf to take it. No problem, it is Dazzling Gleam. And from here, I assume Michael's going to switch out to Ting-Lu or something. But instead, he's actually just going to stay in and hit a Flamethrower as I set up my Future Sight. I really wish I'd clicked Thunder Wave there, but I really didn't think he was going to switch anything in. Or, sorry, stay in. He does have to fear the Future Sight, though, so he'll go out into Slowbro. As I actually just protected for some leftovers. This thing should be pretty passive though, so I'll just wish up to full. As the Slowbro actually clicks Ice Beam, that makes sense to catch the Hydreigon on the switch. That's fine though, on the next turn I don't even have to protect, since this isn't doing much damage to me. I'll just Thunder Wave, because I have a free turn, and Ice Beam comes out, and it freezes. Well, at the very least, I'm almost back to full here after the wish, but this is kind of bad. Farigiraf is my best check for Salamance's Iron Moth, and probably Magnezone as well, if we're being honest, so that's a huge loss. I admit I wasn't too salty about this happening, mostly because you kind of have to expect this kind of thing when multiple Ice Beams are being thrown out, and I'd rather this get frozen as opposed to something that can actually make progress on my opponent's team. Still though, kind of unlucky. I'll switch out to Hydreigon to start applying some pressure on the Slowbro, but it's actually the Salamence that came in, and I definitely want no part of that matchup. So I guess Farigiraf can still tank a hit even if it's frozen, so we'll switch that in on the Draco. And on the next turn, Salamence decides to stay in, reveals its final move in Earthquake, as I just stay frozen. So I had some thoughts about trying to bait a fire move from Iron Moth later on to thaw Farigiraf, but I don't think I can count on that. I'll just stay in on the -2 Salamence and either thaw or go down. I think that on these next few turns, it's interesting that Michael elects not to sub up, but I can understand not wanting to give me the extra turns to thaw. So these next few slides, I guess I get it. I do just stay frozen though until I'm going to go down here for a 5-5 game after this. Well, Farigiraf being gone sucks, but we'll have to deal. My revenge options for Salamence are actually kind of limited. Iron Moth outspeeds, but that uses up my booster energy and probably my Terra to avoid the risk of missing the KO and then going down to Earthquake. Alternatively, Great Tusk could set up on it at -2, but even after the Draco drop, Hurricane still does a lot. Meanwhile, Fortress is an option with Ice Spinner, and we just found out Salamence isn't running a fire move, so why not try it? We will come in and take the -2 Hurricane, and we do get confused, but luckily still hit the Ice Spinner for the KO. No Intimidate drop there, so that's why we're able to KO from full. I am a little surprised that he let me have that Salamence, but I can understand not wanting to risk a switch in on a potential Pin Missile or Earthquake, and I think Michael admitted to me that he wasn't thinking about Ice Spinner as potential coverage. Regardless, that's another big threat out of there, as the Iron Moth naturally comes back in. Fortress has done a great job, but as weakened as it is, I don't see any more opportunities for it, so I just need to sack for a safe revenge. Good job, Fortress, but your time is up for this battle. I'm going to have a Flamethrower, and the game remains even at 4-4. Okay, so my revenge here is going to be the Azumarill. Obviously, I'm threatening big with Banded Aquajet, and Iron Moth is basically his only real offensive threat left, so a switch out feels pretty telegraphed here. Well, either that or a Terra, but either way, I'm going to double right back out into Hydreigon, and we do successfully read the Slowbro switching in. Hydreigon's back in, threatening big, and a Dark Pulse just takes out his defensive wall. And it seems like Michael is trying to save Ting-Lu's health for later. I don't know why he's not bringing it in yet, but I'll certainly take the KOs where I get them. Iron Moth, of course, comes back in as the revenge threatening Dazzling Gleam, and I think he's going to be forced to go for it, so I feel safe enough now swapping in my own Iron Moth. And we are going to switch in, get the booster, which is a little wasted, but we take very minor damage from the very move. It sucks to have that popped, but I think now I should outspeed his whole team anyway, save for maybe Scarf Magnezone, which I'm not particularly expecting. From here, I'm just going to Psychic, and that does obviously 2 KO, and we just trade Psychics. We're 2-hit KOing each other, but I am the one outspeeding, and that threatens him right out into Ting-Lu. Which is immune to the Psychic. I did suspect that this switch is going to happen, but I didn't feel like I had room to read it with my Moth on the line. And from here, I could either go for damage with Dazzling Gleam and sack Iron Moth, or I can make a switch. I think, though, that I'd like to keep Iron Moth around for its good Magnezone matchup, and I don't want to risk any of Great Tusk or Hydreigon's HP right now, so I decided in this moment to sack off Azumarill to Throat Chop. This, I think, could have been a slight mistake. I would have loved to get some damage with Dazzling Gleam from Iron Moth, and Azumarill looks like it could have put in some work against Ting-Lu, but I don't think I regret the play too much. Iron Moth does look really valuable for the endgame. So it is 3-3, and we're pretty solidly in the endgame at this point, with my Iron Moth, Great Tusk, and Hydreigon against his Ting-Lu, Iron Moth, and Magnezone. My only viable revenge here is Great Tusk, which is threatening with a fighting move. Not that I have a fighting move, but instead I think I can just set up. The game plan is to go for Rapid Spin into 2 Ice Spinners, which should KO the Ting-Lu. We'll take 2 Earthquakes in return probably, but that we should live comfortably. From there, that could just be game, as Headlong Rush cleanly KOs both of the remaining Mons after that. Of course, keep in mind that neither of us have Terra'd yet, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Rapid Spin for the speed boost is the first step. Very nice, and we are going to take, of course, the Earthquake. Ice Spinner obviously does miss out on the KO here, as expected, and 1 more Earthquake goes off before I can knock out the Ting-Lu with a Headlong Rush. That's 1 more Pokemon down, as the revenge is going to be Magnezone. So, as far as I know, his only way out of this loss is a Terastallization. I'm assuming because Michael brought Magnezone in here, it probably has Grass or Flying as its Terra type to not get KO'd by the Headlong Rush. I could read that to varying degrees, and actually all 3 of my offensive moves have merit here. Headlong Rush KOs Magnezone, provided that it doesn't Terra. Ice Spinner hits the Terra types I'm expecting for super effective damage, and Knockoff is the mid-ground, guaranteed to make some kind of progress no matter what type he is, but it would also never KO, obviously. And I decided to settle on Headlong Rush, mainly because I think the worst case scenario for me is him not revealing his Terra and then still beating Great Tusk by surviving. If he wants to win this matchup, I want him to have to expend that resource, and then I can use my last 2 Pokemon to react to whatever Terra type he would be, and then win the game from there. I think in hindsight, Knockoff was at least as good an option here to catch any surprise items, but I still stand by this play that puts the burden on him to use up his Terra. So with that said, it is Terra Grass, and Headlong Rush obviously does not KO, while the Flash Cannon in return easily does. I think I should have the game won here. Iron Moth revenges pretty easily with Fiery Dance, or it would if Magnezone wasn't holding an Akka Berry, and with one last surprise, KOs my Iron Moth with a Thunderbolt. Yikes. Yeah, I'm kicking myself for not using Knockoff last turn, and I'm also kicking myself for not using Sludge Wave that turn, but an Akka Berry was so far off my radar at this point. Great prep on Michael's part, as I send in Hydreigon as my last Pokemon standing. Excuse the turn ahead there. And despite how tense this endgame is, my path to victory is still pretty clear. It starts with a quick Dark Pulse here to KO Magnezone, as it essentially had to go down this turn to give a safe switch in to the final 1v1 Hydreigon versus Iron Moth. And once again, Dazzling Gleam threatens the KO, and with my investment, I don't even necessarily KO back with Dark Pulse. But looking at the calcs, if I Terrastalize, even if he reads that Terrastalization with a Flamethrower, I should not be 2-hit KO'd. So that does only leave me with one option. Terra Ghost to shrug off the Dazzling Gleam, hit one Dark Pulse, and then the next turn. Flamethrower does not KO, so one last Dark Pulse will take the game 1-0 for the championship title. The Noctowls have won the Wooper Club's first Gen 9 season. Good game to Michael. This was an incredibly tense finals match, and I think it's safe to say we both brought our A game to a match that ended in a 1-0 at 28% health. Despite how close it was, I was very happy with the way I played this game. Every team member had a chance to shine. My opponent's Salamence and Iron Moth were pretty threatening, but Farigiraf ended up being an amazing check into those. It's unfortunate that we got frozen there, but it still performed its role well until then. Azumarill did underperform a bit in this battle. It didn't actually click player off a single time, but I was pretty happy with the pressure it applied to force Slowbro in over the course of the battle. And of course, Fortress traded positive with an incredibly fun set that KO'd Salamence nearly from full. And Great Tusk and Iron Moth were offensive monsters in the endgame, but I can't give MVP to any Pokemon besides Hydreigon, who came in early and demolished the Chien-Pao, and then went on to claim a total of 4 KOs in this match to seal the game. So that wraps up Season 12 of the Wooper Club League. That's a championship title for the Newport Noctowls, to top off an undefeated season, thanks to this amazing team that I was able to pilot. I'd like to talk about each of them just in case you're curious about whether you should pick these mons up for your next draft. I'll go in order of times brought to weed out the quote-unquote underperformers, so that means we start with Kilowattrel. And honestly, I wouldn't even say this guy underperformed in the matches I brought it to. With a Choice Scarf set in Week 1 to keep faster threats in check, and a bulky set to switch in a Masquerada in the quarterfinals, I'd say Kilowattrel did a fine job in its 2 appearances, and I hope that it forced some uncomfortable speed creeping in the higher tiers, even when it didn't show up. I just think that I had a hard time wanting to bring it in the higher powered level of a free draft metagame, but I would definitely recommend this in a standard draft as a good value pick with solid power and a great speed stat. This draft team just wasn't quite the place for it to shine, especially since it was competing with Rotom Mow. And this also didn't necessarily underperform when it was brought, but it was only brought twice. I drafted this mostly to deal with the bulky water types that I would encounter, and it did do that. It checked Quagsire and Pelipper in the 2 weeks I brought it, and on top of that it crippled Iron Hands in Week 3 with Trick. But I guess I didn't like it for that many matchups. It did always feel like it was weak to some coverage move my opponent was likely to bring, so that might have just been a matchup thing. It was alright. Moving on. Poltegeist was probably the biggest disappointment of my season. It's a Shell Smash sweeper that could have been very powerful with Terra, but I never even clicked Shell Smash with it. I actually really liked the one time I brought a defensive set against the Bulldors. I still think that Poltegeist support move pool is underrated. I wish I got to use it a little more, but this is another victim of that higher power metagame, I think. I also think I'm just not that good at using Shell Smash sweepers between Blastoise last season and then this, so maybe it's just not my playstyle. I'm sure it's good, but I just wasn't that good with it. So those are the only 3 that I didn't rely on too much for this season, but everything else from here more or less defined my team. Farigiraf at 5 brings was in more of a backseat role throughout the season, mostly just running Spadef sets with Wish, but that was a role my team really needed. Farigiraf was my team's answer to some big threats. Iron Valiant, Slowbro, Gengar, Sandy Shocks, Salamence, and Iron Moth were all successfully walled. I wish I could have used some more diverse sets with it. I think I basically ran some combination of Wish, Protect, Future Sight, Psychic, and Thunderwave every week it hit the field, but it served its role very well. Its stats are just really adaptable for a draft. I would definitely use Farigiraf again. Next up is T-Tar at 5 rings and a 1-3 KD ratio, but that's definitely a misrepresentation of how useful it was. Pretty much all of its usefulness came from especially defensive sets, but they were helpful in staving off Iron Jugulus and Iron Thorns in week 1 with Terra Fairy, and it was also really important for dealing with Chi-Yu and Espathra in my matches against Quiet Majesty. I swear, this Pokemon is like the entire reason that I had such a good matchup against that team. I do wish I could have gotten some more use out of its offensive potential, but on this team, the high special defense in Sand was just so useful. This is also an amazing Terra candidate in any metagame that allows it, since the high stat block, great moveset, and Tyranitar's very polarized typing means that mixing up its defensive profile makes it a ton more versatile than it already was. Regardless, Terra or not, I would definitely recommend this as a widely adaptable draft Pokemon. Next up is Fortress, which I drafted as a later round Steel type as a downgrade from Scizor, but I was very happy with how it served the team. I think Fortress is usually underwhelming, since as a wall it tends to get chipped down pretty easily, but on this team that's already full of physical bulk, Fortress didn't have as much pressure on it to switch into every physical threat, so it instead excelled at checking specific threats and taking over the hazard control game. And it does show that this isn't the Pokemon to rely on as your physical wall, since I didn't bring it all that consistently, but this was a good switch into things like Chien-Pao, Meowscarada, even like defensive things like Toxapex and Sylveon, and Iron Hands as well, to either gain momentum with a slow Volt Switch, or set Stealth Rock or Spikes. I would definitely recommend this to a team not as your primary physical wall, but as a way to shore up matchups against specific teams or Pokemon. And I don't even need to mention the loaded dice set in the finals. That was one of my favorite sets of the entire season. Part of the reason I didn't need to rely on Fortress as a wall was Dondozo, which was without a doubt my most consistent defensive Pokemon. I tend to run bulkier teams in draft, and a thick unaware wall really does help that kind of playstyle. It really just discourages setup both in the team builder and in the battle, and no matter what battle I was bringing it to, it did a great job of stopping offensive threats. I think the Terra performances were really its highlights of the season. Terra Steel put the team on its back in week 8 against the Kinglers, and Terra Fighting stopped the Terra Quaquaval in its tracks before breaking through too much of my team. Definitely a valuable member of the team, would recommend Dondozo. With the last 4 slots, I'm basically getting into my main offensive core in the season, starting off with Hydreigon with 7 brings. And this was one of the highlights of my season. It took a backseat role early with a pretty nice performance against the Troopers with a Nasty Plot set, but really came into its own near the end of the season with that Terra Steel set in week 7 that carried my team to victory by walling the rest of the Aggron's remaining team that was alive. And then, both times against Steve, dropped powerful Draco Meteors to break open their team. And then in the final performance, it speaks for itself. 4-0 in the battle to top off a 13-2 KD for the season. This is an MVP candidate for sure. Hydreigon's stats and move pool are just so good, especially with Terra available, and that this is just such a customizable Pokemon, which means that it's always an amazing draft Pokemon, and it was an absolute steal at round 3. And shoutouts to this guy for being a part of 2 of my championship teams now between seasons 8 and 12. Love Hydreigon. Next is Azumarill with 9 brings and a relatively modest 10-5 record, but I was really happy to have it this season. Huge power obviously makes this a powerful attacker, but I made a call at the beginning of the season that this would have a really good defensive profile for the meta, and I think that actually aged pretty well. Dark types and Dragon types were a big part of the meta, and as such, Azumarill made for a great way to counter all the Ruinous Legendaries, Roaring Moon, Dragonite, and more. I didn't run super offensive sets that often. Choice Band and Belly Drum sets only showed up 1 time apiece, which contrasts the other converts' Azumarill quite a bit, and instead I really favored Assault Vest or Defensive Berries, and I thought that still made for a pretty good season for Azumarill, just a less offensive one than you might expect. Next is going to be Iron Moth, which was my round 2 pick, brought 9 times with a KD of 6 and 1. That is kind of a modest KO count for what I would consider a big part of my offensive core, but I really like what Iron Moth brought to the team. I didn't even use it offensively that often, only getting more out of booster energy sets in the later weeks. Up until then, I got a lot of value out of pivot sets with boots, shoring up the overall weaker special defense of my team. Interestingly enough, I had thought about drafting Volcarona in this slot instead of Iron Moth. As a Pokemon, I think Volcarona is better overall, especially with access to open Terra Quiver Dance sets, but I do think Iron Moth provided a lot that Volcarona couldn't. The speed tier, for one thing, makes it a better pivot in a lot of matchups, and the poison typing is very valuable to turn Iron Moth into an excellent fairy killer, which was appreciated by Great Tusk and Hydreigon. I do also have a new appreciation for booster energy Iron Moth after using it a few times this season. Booster energy speed doesn't quite compare to something like Quiverdance Volcarona as a sweeper, but it is a great cleaner in win condition that can just start going off without even needing a turn of setup. It's a set that has a very high ceiling on a Pokemon that already has a lot going for it. I would highly recommend Iron Moth for all that it brings to a team. And finally, we have my round 1 pick, Great Tusk, brought to all 11 games this season with a KD of 20 and 4 to make this the overall KO leader for the season. For the most part, I brought the same kind of set for the entire season, some combination of attack, HP, and speed investment, with some combination of stab moves, knockoff, ice spinner, and of course rapid spin. Slap on the right item for the matchup, and you have yourself the best physical tank in the meta. This Pokemon fills every role that you could want out of something like this. It comes in and shrugs off physical hits all day, and then it hits back with incredible power. You could call this a wall and a wall breaker with the same set. And on top of that, it gets Rapid Spin, which not only gives this the rare title of high tier hazard removal, but it also means that after spending the early game being an amazing tank, you can bring it in later and Rapid Spin to get to +1 from its already solid speed tier, and just sweep the rest of the team. There were so many weeks where Great Tusk put in work early breaking things down before getting off a Rapid Spin and becoming my best sweeper, whether or not I even planned on it being a sweeper for that week. This is an amazing Pokemon, and I honestly, looking back on it, I think this might have been good enough to warrant a terrestrialization ban on it, like some of the other Pokemon in the conference, since I would rather have this than a few of those Pokemon that were given that restriction. Not that it even needed Terra to be amazing. It only Terra'd once in week 2, and had amazing performances throughout the season. Maybe fell off a little at the end there as Hydreigon started to carry the team, and I kind of played Great Tusk a little poorly, maybe like in week 8 specifically, but I would still easily award Great Tusk the title of MVP for my season, a very worthy round 1 pick that I would use again. If you're watching this and thinking about using Great Tusk for your next draft, use it, you won't be disappointed. And that will finally close my analysis of my run at Season 12 of the Wooper Club League. It goes without saying that I am very happy with how I did here, with a completely undefeated run and a championship title, so I'm going to hold myself back from talking about it any longer. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, and go check out the Wooper Club League main channel in the description for more content, including the quickly upcoming Season 13. At this point, there might even be Season 13 content on there. Yeah, I made this video pretty late. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time.